In the bitter winter of 1944, as Allied armies pressed deeper into German-occupied territories, several temporary prisoner-of-war camps were hastily established across the frozen landscapes of France and Belgium. These camps were built for expedience, not comfort barbed wire perimeters, wooden barracks thrown together in days guard towers manned by soldiers who'd rather be anywhere else. They were designed to hold captured German soldiers until they could be processed and transferred to permanent facilities. But war rarely follows plans. On December 18, 1944, a convoy of trucks rumbled up to one such camp on a windswept plateau near the French-Belgian border. The location had been chosen for strategic convenience, close enough to supply lines far enough from active combat. What it lacked was any consideration for the bitter cold that descended each night like a predator, temperatures plummeting to 5 degrees Fahrenheit wind chill, driving it lower still. The guards on duty expected another load of captured Wehrmacht soldiers. What they got instead was 42 women. They stumbled from the trucks in various states of exhaustion: clerks, nurses, radio operators, anti-aircraft assistants. Female auxiliaries of the German military, most barely out of their teens, all wearing the same expression of hollow-eyed fear. They'd been marching for days after their surrender, sleeping in ditches, eating whatever scraps their American captors could spare. They were cold, hungry, and terrified. Among them was Annalisa Kohler. At 16, she was one of the youngest. Blonde hair pulled into a practical braid, blue eyes that had once sparkled with dreams of becoming a music teacher now dulled by exhaustion and grief. She wore a thin coat over her Signal Corps uniform, civilian leather shoes that had soaked through hours ago, and carried nothing but a small cloth bundle containing a photograph of her family and a letter from her mother that she'd read so many times the paper was falling apart at the creases. Annalisa came from Garmisch-Partenkirchen in Bavaria, where her father Hermann had run a bakery that had been in the family for 3 generations. The smell of fresh bread had filled their home every morning until 1942, when Hermann died at Stalingrad. After that, there was no money for flour, no money for anything. Her mother Margaret tried to keep the bakery going, but without Hermann's expertise and with rationing strangling supply, it was hopeless. By early 1944, they were destitute. So Annalisa, barely 16, joined the Signal Corps. The pay was modest 30 Reichsmarks a month, but it was enough to keep her mother and 12-year-old sister Liesel from starving. She'd been assigned to a communication station in Belgium, listening to radio chatter, transcribing messages, doing the dull work that kept armies functioning. She'd never fired a weapon, never hurt anyone, never even saw combat until the day American forces overran their position, and she found herself with her hands raised, surrendering to soldiers who looked as young and frightened as she felt. That had been 5 days ago. Now she stood in formation outside Barrack 7, shivering violently as a bored American sergeant checked names against a list. The building behind them was barely more than a shell wooden planks, a roof that leaked in places, no insulation, no heat. Through the gaps in the walls, wind howled with a sound that was almost human. "Inside," the sergeant ordered, gesturing. 42 of you, that barracks. Don't cause trouble." They filed in, and the door closed behind them with a hollow thud that sounded like a coffin lid. The interior was somehow colder than outside. Wind found every gap in the walls, every crack in the floorboards. Wooden bunks lined both sides, rough planks without mattresses, without blankets, just bare wood that had already accumulated a thin layer of frost. There was a single bucket in the corner for waste. No stove, no light except what filtered through the spaces between boards. "Gott im Himmel," someone whispered. "God in heaven." Annalisa found a bunk and sat carefully, the wood so cold it burned through her thin coat. Around her, the other women were doing the same, finding spaces, pressing close together, trying to share body heat. Some were crying. Others sat in stunned silence. A few, like Annalisa, simply closed their eyes and tried to remember what warmth felt like. "They're going to freeze us to death," a voice said in German. Annalisa opened her eyes to see a woman in her mid-20s standing near the center of the barracks. She was tall, sharp-featured, with dark hair cut short and eyes that held more anger than fear. "That's their plan. No torture, no shooting, just leave us here until we die from the cold. Clean, efficient, very American." "Don't say that," a younger voice protested. 14-year-old Helga, who'd been an auxiliary nurse before capture. "Maybe they'll bring blankets. Maybe nothing." The older woman's voice was bitter. "I'm Greta Lindemann. I used to write propaganda for the Ministry of Public Enlightenment. I know what I'm talking about. Americans don't show mercy to Germans. Why would they? We bombed their allies, killed their soldiers. They'll let us freeze and call it justice." Annalisa wanted to argue, wanted to believe that human beings wouldn't deliberately leave women to die from cold. But she remembered the propaganda films she'd seen in school, Americans burning German cities, laughing over corpses, committing atrocities. Surely some of it was exaggeration, but surely not all of it. That first night lasted forever. Temperature dropped steadily as darkness fell. By midnight, ice was forming on the interior walls. Annalisa pressed herself between two other women, all three of them shivering so violently their teeth chattered in rhythm. She'd given her coat to Helga, who had nothing but a thin sweater. Now, Annalisa wore only her uniform jacket, and it was woefully inadequate. Her father's voice came to her across the years. "Anchen, when winter comes to the mountains, the weak die. Only the strong survive. And sometimes only the kind survive, because kindness makes us help each other, and together we're stronger than alone." She reached for the hands of the women on either side of her. They gripped back, holding tight. Together, they survived the night. Morning came with weak sunlight that offered no warmth. The women stirred slowly, checking themselves for damage. Annalisa tried to stand and nearly fell. Her legs had gone numb during the night. She stamped her feet, trying to restore circulation, and felt a distant burning sensation that was somehow worse than numbness. Roll call was conducted outside. Several women couldn't stand without support. The American guards looked uncomfortable, but did nothing beyond checking names and dismissing them back to the barracks. No blankets materialized. No heat was provided. Just another day of slow freezing. By the third night, December 20th, the whispers began. "I can't feel my feet." Annalisa heard it first from the bunk beside her, then from across the barracks, then from her own lips, because it was true, the burning sensation had faded to nothing. Her toes were numb, her feet blocks of ice inside her useless leather shoes. She pulled them off with clumsy fingers and stared at her feet in the dim light. They were purple-grey, swollen. Two of her toes had turned completely white. "Does anyone know about frostbite?" someone called out in the darkness. Greta's voice answered, grim and knowing. "I covered the Eastern Front. Wrote stories about brave soldiers enduring winter. Frostbite has stages. Stage 1, your skin turns white and hard, painful but reversible. Stage 2, blisters form, tissue damage begins. Stage 3, your flesh freezes, deep blood stops flowing. Stage 4, she paused. Stage 4, the tissue dies, turns black. They have to amputate or you die from sepsis." Silence greeted this. Then someone started crying. Then several. Within minutes, panic rippled through Barrack 7 like wind through winter grass. "We're going to lose our feet. They're letting us die." Just like they said. Just like the propaganda said. Americans are cruel. Annalisa looked at her white toes and felt something crack inside her chest, not quite despair, but close. She'd survived her father's death, survived poverty, survived surrender and captivity. Was she really going to die from frozen feet in an American prison camp? Was this what all her struggle had been for? No, she thought fiercely. No. I have to see Mutter again. I have to see Liesel. I promised I'd come home. "Listen," she called out, voice cutting through the panic. "Listen to me. My father was a mountain guide before he became a baker. He taught me winter survival. We have to keep moving our feet. Even if we can't feel them, we move them. Blood flow keeps tissue alive. Wiggle your toes, rotate your ankles, rub them with your hands. Don't stop moving." "What's the point?" someone sobbed. "We're all going to die here anyway." "Maybe," Annalisa admitted, "but I'm not dying without fighting, and neither should you." She began the exercises her father had taught her, slow, deliberate movements designed to maintain circulation even in extreme cold. Around her, gradually, others joined in. Not everyone. Some had given up already, lying still on their bunks waiting for the end. But enough. Enough to matter. Morning of December 21st brought the coldest day yet. During roll call, 12 women couldn't stand without assistance. 3 collapsed entirely. The American guards finally seemed to realize something was seriously wrong. Young Private Eddie Kowalski, barely 19 with a Chicago accent and frightened eyes, actually entered the barracks to check on the fallen women. He emerged pale and shaken. "Sergeant Hayes," he called to his superior. "Sir, you need to see this. Jesus Christ, sir, they're freezing to death in there." Sergeant William Hayes, a career soldier with a by-the-book demeanor and 35 years of hard living etched into his face, followed Kowalski into the barracks. He emerged 5 minutes later, looking grim. "Get medical up here," he ordered. "Now, radio for Corporal Brennan. Tell him it's urgent." 20 minutes later, a jeep pulled up outside Barracks 7, and a man climbed out carrying a medic's bag. Corporal Thomas Brennan was 28 years old, Irish-American from South Boston, with dark hair starting to thin and shadows under his eyes that spoke of too many horrors witnessed and too little sleep. He'd landed at Normandy on D-Day as a paramedic, survived the hedgerows of France and the frozen hell of Belgium, and carried scars both visible and invisible from 8 months of continuous combat. He also carried guilt. Heavy, crushing guilt that sat on his chest every morning when he woke and every night when he tried to sleep. 2 weeks ago, just 2 weeks, his best friend Michael O'Brien had died in his arms from frostbite complications. They'd been trapped in a foxhole during the Battle of the Bulge, temperatures sub-zero, Michael's boots soaked through. By the time Brennan realized how serious it was, stage 3 frostbite had set in. Michael died 36 hours later, 22 years old, engagement ring in his pocket, letter to his fiancée Marie never sent. Brennan had replayed those 36 hours 1,000 times. If he'd given Michael both his blankets instead of just one, if he'd recognized the symptoms faster, if he'd done anything differently, maybe Michael would still be alive. Maybe. Now he pushed open the door to Barracks 7 and stepped into a nightmare. 42 women, most barely more than girls, huddled in the freezing dark. Purple feet visible even from the doorway. The smell of unwashed bodies and fear thick in the air. Ice coating the interior walls. And those eyes, terrified eyes, staring at him like he was either salvation or death, they couldn't tell which. Brennan's flashlight swept the barracks and his stomach dropped. Michael. This is Michael all over again. 42 Michaels. No, he whispered. Not again. I won't watch this again. He set his medic bag down carefully and raised his voice. Guten Tag. I'm Corporal Brennan. I'm a medic. I'm here to help. His German was terrible, heavily accented, but he tried. Ich bin Sanitäter. I help you. Silence greeted him. 42 pairs of eyes watched without response. He approached the nearest bunk where a young woman sat with her feet tucked under her skirt. May I examine your feet? Füße sehen. His grammar was probably atrocious, but he was trying. The woman recoiled, shaking her head rapidly, whispering something in rapid German he couldn't understand. Fear. Pure animal fear. Brennan pulled out a small notebook where he'd written phonetic German phrases for medical situations. He found the right page. Können Sie Ihre Zehen fühlen? Can you feel your toes? The woman stared at him. Then, slowly, still watching him like he might strike, she shook her head. No, she couldn't feel them. Okay, Brennan said softly, more to himself than her. Okay. This is bad. This is really bad. He moved through the barracks methodically, asking the same question, getting the same answer. Numb. Can't feel them. Hurts, but numb. By the time he reached the 20th woman, his hands were shaking. By the 30th, he was fighting back tears. By the 42nd, he knew exactly what he was looking at. Stage 2. Frostbite, 18 cases. Stage 3, frostbite, 8 cases. Stage 1, 16 cases. Without immediate intervention, without proper treatment, he was looking at dozens of amputations. Maybe multiple deaths from sepsis. He was looking at 42 Michael O'Briens. When he reached the young woman with blonde braids and startlingly blue eyes, she was sitting upright despite shivering violently. She'd wrapped her thin coat around a younger girl beside her. Her own feet, when she reluctantly extended them for examination, were swollen and discoloured mottled grey-purple, with 2 toes gone completely white. Stage 2, verging on Stage 3. Maybe 8 hours before irreversible damage. Können Sie Ihre Zehen fühlen? He asked. Nein, she whispered. Then in halting English that surprised him. I cannot feel, since this morning. Gone. You speak English? Little. I learn in school. Before. Her accent was thick, but her grammar decent. Better than his German, certainly. What's your name? Annalisa. Annalisa Kohler. I'm Thomas Brennan. He examined her toes carefully, checking capillary refill the time it took for colour to return after he pressed on her skin. Too slow. Dangerously slow. Your toes are frostbitten. Stage 2. We need to warm them slowly and carefully. If we do it right, you'll keep them. And if wrong, he'd never believed in lying to patients. If wrong, you lose them. But I've done this before. I know what I'm doing. You do this for Germans, for enemies. I do this for people. He set her foot down gently. That's all that matters. You're people. You're cold. You're hurt. I'm a medic. Simple as that. Why you help us? The question hit harder than it should have. Brennan paused, medic bag in hand, and for a moment he was back in that frozen foxhole with Michael's body growing cold in his arms. Because someone I cared about died this way, he said quietly, and I couldn't save him. Maybe I can save you. Before Annalisa could respond, A sharp voice cut through the barracks. "Don't touch them!" A tall, dark-haired woman in her mid-20s stepped forward, placing herself between Brennan and the younger women. Her eyes were hard, suspicious, and completely unafraid, despite the armed Americans standing before her. "My name is Greta Lindemann," she said in precise English. "I was a writer for the Reich Ministry of Public Enlightenment. I've read the reports. I've written the reports. Americans torture prisoners, humiliate them, abuse them. This kindness," she gestured at his medic bag with contempt, "is just preparation for something worse." "I won't let you hurt them." Brennan didn't argue, didn't try to persuade her with words. Instead, he simply set down his bag, pulled off his left glove, and held up his hand. The ring and pinky fingers were missing. Scar tissue had healed over the stumps, but the absence was unmistakable. "Frostbite," he said quietly. "Normandy, June 1944. Lost them 3 days after D-Day when we got pinned down in the rain." He pulled off his right boot, then his sock revealing his left foot. 2 toes were missing. "Lost these the same week." Greta stared at the scars. The propaganda had taught her to expect cruelty, sadism, torture. It hadn't prepared her for this, an enemy soldier who'd suffered the same nightmare they were living through now. "You," her voice faltered. "You know what this is?" "Yeah." Brennan's voice was rough with barely suppressed emotion. "I know exactly what this is. And I know what happens next if we don't treat it." He paused, jaw tightening. 2 weeks ago my best friend died from this. Michael O'Brien. Battle of the Bulge. Same purple toes. Same numbness. I tried to save him, but I was too slow. 36 hours later he was dead from sepsis. The barracks had gone silent. Even the wind outside seemed to hold its breath. "I won't be slow again," Brennan continued, and something broke in his voice. "I can't be. So you can trust me or not, that's your choice. But those women have maybe 8 to 12 hours before permanent damage, some of them less. I can save them, but only if you let me." Annalisa saw it then, the tears gathering in his eyes, the tremor in his scarred hands, the weight of guilt and grief carved into every line of his face. This wasn't a soldier following orders. This was a man desperate not to fail again. "He tells truth," she said in German for the others. "Look at his hands. Look at his foot. He's been where we are. He understands." Greta's skepticism cracked just slightly. She studied Brennan's face, the exhaustion, the sorrow, the fierce determination. Finally, reluctantly, she stepped aside. "If you hurt them," she said in careful English, "if this is a trick, I will find a way to make you pay. I don't care if I'm a prisoner. I will make you pay." "Fair enough." Brennan picked up his bag and turned toward the door. "I need supplies. Keep the women moving their feet even if they can't feel them. Movement maintains blood flow. I'll be back in 20 minutes. He pushed through the door into the frozen morning, and Private Kowalski was waiting. "How bad is it, Corporal?" "Bad." Brennan's voice was flat. "Real bad. I need you to get Sergeant Hayes. Now." 5 minutes later, Brennan stood before Sergeant William Hayes and made demands that could end his military career. "Sir, I need resources immediately. Heated tent set up within 15 minutes. 50 gallons of warm water, not hot exactly, 98 to 102 degrees Fahrenheit. Every spare blanket in this camp, every pair of socks, every boot we can spare." Hayes frowned, consulting his clipboard. "Corporal, those supplies are allocated for our combat troops. Our troops aren't dying of frostbite right now." Brennan's voice was sharp as broken glass. "Those women are. Stage 2 and Stage 3 frostbite across the board. Without immediate intervention, we're looking at mass amputations, maybe deaths from sepsis. I watched my best friend die from this 2 weeks ago. I'm not watching it happen to 42 more people. They're enemy prisoners. They're people and they're dying." Brennan stepped closer, voice dropping to something harder and more desperate. "Sir, I'm asking you as one soldier to another. I need these supplies. I need them now. Court-martial me after I save them if that's what it takes. But get me what I need." Hayes and Brennan stared at each other. The wind howled. Somewhere in the distance, a truck engine struggled to start in the cold. Finally, Hayes exhaled a long breath that formed clouds. "Inventory error," he said. "That's what I'll call it. Inventory error. You've got 2 hours, Corporal. Make them count." "Thank you, sir." Hayes turned to leave, then paused. "Brennan, why are you doing this? Really?" "Because someone has to, sir. And right now, that someone is me." 20 minutes later, organized chaos descended on the area near Barracks 7. A large supply tent was commandeered and converted to a heated medical station. Portable kerosene heaters were hauled in and lit their orange glow, cutting through the winter gloom. Water was heated in massive kettles over field stoves, temperatures monitored obsessively with thermometers. Blankets were stacked. Boots were sorted by size. Private Kowalski and 3 other soldiers worked at double speed, their breath forming white clouds as they hauled supplies through the snow. Inside Barracks 7, Brennan returned with 2 medical assistants. "Listen up," he called out in his broken German, then switched to English while Annalisa translated. 8 of you with the worst cases are coming with me to the heated tent. The rest will be treated here. We're going to warm your feet in water. It's going to hurt. A lot. The pain means blood is returning. The pain means healing. Do you understand?" Heads nodded. Some women were crying. Others were too exhausted to show emotion. The 8 critical cases, women whose feet had turned colors that didn't belong on living tissue, whose toes were starting to turn black, were carried out on stretchers. Annalisa watched them go, then felt Brennan's hand on her shoulder. "You're borderline stage 3, he said gently. "I'm treating you personally in the heated tent. Come with me." She stood on shaking legs and followed him into the winter sunlight. The heated tent was the warmest place Annalisa had been in 5 days. The kerosene heaters glowed orange, radiating blessed warmth that made her skin tingle and prickle. She could feel her face again, actually feel its sensation returning like pins and needles. Brennan guided her to a chair, then knelt before her with a basin of water. Steam rose from its surface, curling in the cold air. "This is going to hurt," he warned, "more than anything you've felt before. But you have to trust me. The pain is necessary. The pain means you're healing. Can you trust me?" Annalisa looked at this stranger, this enemy soldier with scarred hands and missing fingers, this man who'd lost his friend and didn't want to lose anyone else. She saw the desperation in his eyes, the determination, the fierce need to save lives because he hadn't been able to save the one that mattered most. "Yes," she whispered. "I trust you." Brennan gently placed her right foot in the warm water. The pain was instantaneous and absolute. It felt like her toes were being held in fire, like every nerve ending was being stabbed with hot needles, like her flesh was being burned away from her bones. Annalisa gasped, tears streaming down her face. Her hands gripped the chair so hard her knuckles turned white. A scream built in her throat. "Breathe!" Brennan's voice cut through the agony like an anchor. "Count with me. 1, 2. That's it, you're doing great. 3, 4. Keep breathing. 5, 6. "It hurts," she sobbed. "Please, it hurts so much. I know. God, I know it hurts. That pain is good, Annalisa. It means blood is returning. It means your tissue is alive. It means you'll keep your toes." His voice was steady calm, an island of certainty in her ocean of pain. "Keep counting with me. 7, 8. You're so brave. 9, 10. The pain didn't stop. It built and built, wave after wave of burning agony. But gradually, so gradually, she almost didn't notice it changed. The sharp stabbing became throbbing. The unbearable heat became warmth. Her breath came easier. She could think again. "That's it," Brennan murmured. "The worst is over. Just keep breathing. Another 10 minutes, and we'll check the color." 20 minutes felt like 20 hours. But finally, Brennan lifted her foot from the water. He dried it carefully with a clean towel, his movements precise and gentle, despite the urgency of the situation. When he examined her toes, checking capillary refill and tissue color, his face relaxed slightly. "Look," he said, angling her foot so she could see. The grey-purple had faded to pink. Her toes, while still swollen, looked alive. Human. Salvageable. "Oh," Annalise breathed. "Oh, there. I can feel them. I can actually feel them." "Can you wiggle them?" She tried. The movement was small, painful, but real. "Yes, yes." "Good. That's very good." Brennan wrapped her foot in clean gauze, then reached into his bag and pulled out a pair of thick wool socks, American military issue, the kind meant for soldiers in winter combat. "These are mine," he said quietly. "My personal gear. They're warm, they're dry. You need them more than I do." "But," Annalisa stared at the socks. "These are yours. You need them more," he repeated firmly. He slid the sock onto her foot with infinite care. "I've got spares. You don't." The wool was impossibly soft, impossibly warm. Annalisa felt tears welling up again, but these were different tears. Not pain, something else, something she couldn't name. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you, Corporal Brennan." "Thomas," he said. "Call me Thomas." "Thank you, Thomas." He moved to her other foot, repeating the process. This time Annalisa was prepared for the pain. She counted with him from the start. 1, 2, 3, 4, breathing through the fire, trusting that it meant healing, believing that she would survive this. When both feet were wrapped and socked, Brennan sat back on his heels. Exhaustion lined his face. But there was something else there too. Relief, maybe. or satisfaction. "You're going to be okay," he said. "Both feet will heal. You'll have some scarring, but you'll walk normally. You'll run. You'll dance if you want." "I just want to go home," Annalisa said softly. "See my mother, my sister. That's all I want." "You will. This war can't last forever. And when it's over, you'll go home. You'll rebuild. That's what people do. They survive, and then they rebuild." Around them, the heated tent filled with similar scenes. Women crying from pain, then from relief. Brennan's assistants working methodically through the cases, warming frozen feet, wrapping them in gauze, providing the care that should have been given days ago. Outside, the remaining women in Barrack 7 received treatments. 2 basins of warm water brought to them, blankets distributed, dry socks provided. By nightfall on December 21st, 1944, all 42 women of Barrack 7 had been treated. 8 remained in the heated tent for overnight observation. The other 34 returned to the barracks, but this time with blankets, with dry socks, with boots that actually fit, with the knowledge that maybe, just maybe, they would survive this winter after all. Annalisa lay on her bunk, wrapped in a US Army blanket, her feet warm for the first time in 6 days. She could feel her toes, all 10 of them alive and healing. The pain had faded to a dull ache that was almost welcome. It meant she was alive. It meant she would see her mother and Liesel again. She thought about Thomas Brennan, about the tears in his eyes when he spoke of Michael, about his scarred hands treating her frozen feet with such gentleness, about the wool socks he'd given her from his own supplies. Everything they told us was a lie, she thought. Every single propaganda film, every lecture, every warning. They said Americans were cruel. They said they tortured prisoners. They said they had no mercy. But Thomas Brennan had mercy. He had so much mercy, it hurt him. And in that moment, Annalisa Kohler began to understand that the real enemy had never been the Americans. The real enemy was the hate, the propaganda, the lies that turned humans into monsters in each other's minds. Tomorrow would bring more uncertainty. Tomorrow would bring questions about the future, about the war, about what came next. But tonight, wrapped in warmth provided by a man who'd been called her enemy, Annalisa allowed herself something she hadn't felt in months. Hope. And somewhere in a medical tent, Thomas Brennan finally allowed himself to sleep without nightmares. For the first time since Michael died, he'd saved someone. Saved 42 someones. It didn't erase his guilt. Didn't bring Michael back. But it meant something. It had to mean something. "I'm sorry, Michael," he thought as sleep claimed him. "I couldn't save you, but I saved them. That has to count for something. Please let that count for something." In death, Michael O'Brien didn't answer. But 42 sleeping women, warm and healing, answered for him. Morning arrived with pale sunlight that offered light but no warmth. Annalisa woke to a sensation so unexpected, so miraculous, that she lay still for a full minute, just experiencing it. She could feel her toes. Not just vague pressure or distant aching, actual distinct sensation. She flexed them experimentally beneath the wool socks, and they responded. 10 toes, all present, all alive. Around her, the barracks stirred with similar small discoveries. A woman on the next bunk stood for the first time in 3 days and laughed at the feeling of her feet supporting her weight. Another sat examining her recovered toes with something approaching wonder. Even Greta, ever skeptical, was flexing her feet with an expression that might have been gratitude. The door opened, bringing cold air, and Corporal Brennan carrying his worn medical bag. He looked like he hadn't slept. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his movements were slower, weighted with exhaustion. But when Annalisa unwrapped her feet for inspection, his face brightened. "Good," he murmured, checking each toe methodically, pressing gently to test capillary refill. "Very good. Colors normal. Sensation returning. Any pain?" "A little," Annalisa said in her careful English. "But good pain, like you said." "Like I said," he corrected gently, then caught himself. "Sorry." "Your English is excellent, though. I practice every day. In school before war." She paused. "I want to be teacher. English teacher." "You still can be." He rewrapped her feet with fresh gauze. "When you go home. After." That word again. After. It hung in the air between them, heavy with impossible hope. After the war. After the camps. After everything that had brought them to this frozen plateau where enemy and saviour had become the same person. "Corporal Brennan." Annalisa's voice was quiet. "Yesterday you say, you help us because of your friend, Michael. Will you tell me about him?" Brennan's hands stilled on the bandage. For a long moment he didn't speak. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a photograph creased and worn from being carried close to his heart. He handed it to Annalisa. The photograph showed two young men in uniform, arms around each other's shoulders, grinning at the camera with the careless joy of youth. One was clearly Brendan, younger eyes, not yet haunted by what he'd seen. The other was red-haired and freckled, his smile wide and infectious. "That's Michael O'Brien," Brennan said softly. "We grew up together. Same street in South Boston. Irish neighborhood. Everyone knew everyone. We played stickball in the alleys, got into trouble together, spent summers working at his dad's bar." His voice carried the weight of memory, each word carefully placed. "We enlisted together the day after Pearl Harbor, December 8th, 1941. Walked into the recruitment office, holding our birth certificates, swearing we'd come home together." Annalisa studied the photograph. Michael's face held that peculiar innocence that war hadn't yet stripped away the face of someone who believed he was invincible, that death happened to other people, that wars were adventures from which young men returned as heroes. "We trained together at Fort Dix," Brennan continued. "Landed at Normandy together, June the 6th, 1944. Omaha Beach. He paused, jaw working. Bloodiest beach of them all. 2,400 American casualties that day. Michael and I made it off the beach. So many didn't. We thought we'd beaten death. We thought if we survived Omaha, we could survive anything." "But you didn't," Annalisa said gently. "No, we didn't." Brennan's voice cracked. "We survived France, survived Belgium, made it all the way to December. Then came the Battle of the Bulge. You probably heard about it. Germany's last big offensive, caught us completely by surprise." She nodded. Even in captivity, news had filtered through about the massive German counterattack, Hitler's desperate gamble to split the Allied forces. "Michael and I were in a foxhole," Brennan said. "Just the two of us, and 3 days of hell. Snow everywhere. Temperature dropped to 0, then below. We had our rifles, our rations, and each other. That's it." He stopped, hands trembling slightly. On the first day, Michael's boots got wet. River water seeping through the leather. He didn't tell me. Didn't want to seem weak. Didn't want to be sent to the rear when the fighting was heaviest. By the time I noticed, he trailed off. "Frostbite," Annalisa finished. "Stage 3. His toes were black. Not purple like yours were black. I knew what that meant. I'd seen it before in training in medical briefings. Black means tissue death. Black means amputation or sepsis or both." Brennan wiped his eyes roughly. "I tried everything. Rubbed his feet. Gave him both my blankets, both of them. I slept shivering because I thought if I kept him warm enough, maybe the tissue would recover. Kept him talking, kept him awake. Prayed harder than I've ever prayed in my life." The photograph trembled in Annalisa's hands. She could see it in her mind. Two young men in a frozen foxhole, one dying by inches, while the other watched helplessly. "He lasted 36 hours, Brennan said. Started getting feverish on the second day, sepsis from the dead tissue. By the third day, he was delirious, talking to his mother, talking to his girl Marie. She was waiting for him back home. They were going to get married, June wedding. She had the dress picked out and everything." His voice broke completely. "He died in my arms at dawn on December 15th. 22 years old. Engagement ring still in his pocket." Silence filled the barracks. Other women had gathered around, listening to Greta translate the parts they couldn't understand. In the corner, young Helga was crying silently. Even hardened Greta had tears streaming down her face. "I had 2 blankets," Brennan whispered. 2. I gave him both. But it wasn't enough. Nothing was enough. And I've had to live with that for 2 weeks, knowing that my best friend died because I wasn't fast enough, wasn't smart enough, wasn't good enough to save him." "No." Annalisa's voice was firm. She handed the photograph back carefully. "You cannot think this. You give him everything. You try with all your heart. Sometimes," she struggled for the English words, "sometimes people die no matter what we do. It's not your fault. Then whose fault is it? The war's fault, the cold's fault, God's fault maybe, but not yours." She reached out and touched his scarred hand. "You say you save us because you fail Michael. But Corporal Brennan Thomas, you don't fail Michael. You love Michael. You try to save Michael. That is not failure. That is everything." Brennan stared at this 16-year-old enemy girl with blonde braids and wise eyes, and something in his chest shifted. Not healed, not forgiven, but witnessed, acknowledged, shared. "He would be proud of you," Annalisa continued. "Your friend Michael. He would be proud you saved 42 lives. That is not small thing. That is his legacy too. Through you, he saves us all." Around them, women nodded. Greta translated Annaliese's words into German, and murmurs of agreement rippled through the barracks. These women, who'd been taught to hate Americans, who'd expected torture and cruelty, were now bearing witness to a man's grief and finding their own humanity reflected in his pain. "Thank you," Brennan whispered. "Thank you for saying that." "We thank you. All of us. You are a hero." "I'm not a hero. Heroes don't let their friends die. Heroes try to save everyone, even enemies, especially enemies. That is what makes them heroes." Brennan tucked Michael's photograph back into his pocket, close to his heart where it belonged. He finished wrapping Annaliese's feet, then moved to examine the other women. But something had changed in him. The tension in his shoulders had eased slightly. The weight seemed fractionally lighter. For the first time since December 15th, Thomas Brennan allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, saving these 42 women might actually mean something. Might actually honor Michael's memory instead of betraying it. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was close. And for now, close was enough. The days that followed settled into rhythms that felt surreal in their ordinariness. Morning medical checks became routine rather than crisis. Women learned to change their own bandages, monitor their healing progress, help each other with the exercises that maintained circulation. The temperatures remained brutally cold, but the women of Barracks 7 were no longer fighting for survival. They were simply living. On December 25th, Christmas, Private Eddie Kowalski appeared at the barracks with a wooden crate that clinked mysteriously when he set it down. "Merry Christmas, ladies," he announced, grinning. "From Corporal Brennan and, some of the guys." 42 pairs of eyes stared at the crate. Greta approached cautiously and opened it. Inside, wrapped in wax paper, were 42 Hershey's chocolate bars. The women stared at them like they were made of solid gold. Chocolate, real chocolate, sweet and creamy, and American, had been a distant memory for most of them. In Germany, they'd been subsisting on ersatz, everything: ersatz coffee made from acorns, ersatz bread made from sawdust and potato flour, ersatz chocolate that tasted like bitter chalk. Annalisa unwrapped hers slowly, reverently. The distinctive smell filled her nostrils: cocoa and sugar, and something indefinably foreign. She broke off a small piece and placed it on her tongue. The sweetness was overwhelming, rich and creamy, and nothing like the bitter wartime substitutes she'd choked down for years. It melted across her tongue, coating her mouth with flavor so intense it was almost painful. She closed her eyes and just experienced it, tasting something good, something pure, something that had no connection to war or suffering or death. "Is good?" young Helga asked her own chocolate, already half-eaten brown smudges at the corners of her mouth. "Is American," Annalisa said simply, and somehow that explained everything. That afternoon, Kowalski returned with a notebook and pencil, eager enthusiasm written across his young face. "Any of you ladies know baseball?" When they shook their heads in confusion, he grinned wider. "Well, you're about to get an education." He led them outside, those who could walk comfortably, and drew a diamond in the snow with a stick. Home plate, first base, second base, third base. Then he launched into an explanation of America's pastime that made absolutely no sense to anyone present. "Okay, so the pitcher, that's the guy on the mound. See, he throws the ball at the batter. The batter tries to hit it with the bat. If he hits it, he runs to first base. If the other team catches it in the air, he's out. If they throw it to first base before he gets there, he's out. If he makes it safe, he stays on base and the next batter comes up. 4 balls means he walks to first. 3 strikes means he's out. Got it?" 42. Blank stares met this explanation. Kowalski tried again, using smaller words and more gestures. Greta translated, but even in German, baseball made no sense. Why hit a ball only to run in a circle back to where you started? Why was a strike bad but a ball good, unless you got too many balls? What was the point of any of it? "In America," Kowalski said with reverence bordering on religious fervor, "baseball is everything. Summer nights at Fenway Park, hot dogs with mustard cold beer and the crack of the bat hitting leather. My old man took me to see the Red Sox when I was 6 years old. Red Sox versus the Yankees, greatest rivalry in sports. We lost 8-3, but I didn't care. I was at Fenway. That's all that mattered." "This game," Greta said dryly, "is more important than winning the war." Kowalski considered this seriously. "Different kind of important, ma'am. War's duty. Baseball's joy. America needs both." Despite the confusing rules, despite the language barriers, despite everything, there was something infectious about Kowalski's enthusiasm. Several of the women actually smiled real smiles, not the tight expressions of people trying to be brave. For a few minutes, standing in the snow while a 19-year-old from Chicago drew bases, and explained incomprehensible rules, they weren't prisoners. They were just young people trying to understand a strange new world. By late January 1945, the temperature had climbed to a nearly tropical 35 degrees Fahrenheit. Women walked freely around the camp perimeter, their feet fully healed except for minor scarring. Some helped in the camp kitchen under supervision, peeling potatoes and washing dishes. Others organized language lessons, teaching German to curious American soldiers, learning English in return. In the evenings, they sang German folk songs that made even the guards pause and listen, haunting melodies that carried across the frozen plateau like prayers. And slowly, impossibly, something like friendship began to form. Sergeant Hayes, the by-the-book officer who'd initially resisted Brennan's supply requisitions, started appearing at Barracks 7 with mysterious extra rations that were never properly logged. Inventory error, he'd mutter gruffly whenever anyone questioned it, though everyone knew better. His carefully maintained professional distance had crumbled in the face of 42 women who reminded him of his own daughters back home. Brennan's daily medical checks evolved from clinical examinations into something closer to social visits. He brought photographs of Boston the harbour with its fishing boats, the Old North Church, where Paul Revere's signal lanterns had hung the narrow streets of his Irish neighbourhood, where laundry hung between buildings and children played in the gutters. The women showed him what little they had: photos of families, letters from home now, months old, small treasures they'd managed to keep through surrender and captivity. Annalisa told him about Garmisch-Partenkirchen, the mountains that rose like cathedrals behind their town, the smell of fresh bread that used to fill their home every morning, the small stream where she and Liesel would catch minnows in summer. She described her father's bakery, the way Herman would let her knead dough beside him, teaching her the rhythms and timing that couldn't be learned from books. "You miss it," Brennan observed one afternoon as she spoke of home. "Every minute of every day." Annalisa's voice was wistful. "But it's all gone now. The bombs destroyed everything. Mutter wrote me before I was captured, the bakery is rubble. Half the town is rubble.
Everything I remember is just memory now. Not everything. Your mother and sister are still there. You'll see them again. You think so. You believe war will end. Has to end eventually. And when it does, you'll go home. You'll rebuild the bakery. Bake bread like your father taught you. Maybe teach English on the side. You're good at it. Life will go on. Will you go home to Boston when war ends?" Brennan was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know if I can. Boston feels, I don't know, like a place that belongs to who I was before. Before Normandy. Before Michael. I'm not that person anymore. War changes everyone," Annalisa said softly. "Makes us into people we don't recognize. But maybe home helps us remember. Helps us find pieces of who we were. Maybe." But Brennan didn't sound convinced.
On February the 10th, 1945, the transfer orders arrived with all the bureaucratic inevitability of military paperwork. Sergeant Hayes read them aloud during morning briefing, his voice carefully neutral. Female prisoners of war currently housed at Forward Camp 7B to be relocated to Fort de Romainville, France, for duration of hostilities. Permanent camp facilities with improved housing, regular Red Cross access, and proper medical care. Departure date February 12th, 0800 hours. Transport 3 2-ton trucks plus armed escort. The news should have been cause for celebration. Fort de Romainville was a real camp with real facilities, heated barracks, regular meals, access to mail and Red Cross packages. Everything they'd desperately needed 6 weeks ago, everything that could have prevented their near death from frostbite. But as word spread through Barracks 7, relief mixed with something unexpected and complicated. "We're leaving," young Helga said, looking around at the barracks that had almost killed them and somehow become home. "We're really leaving." "Good riddance," Greta said, but her voice lacked its usual bite. "This place tried to freeze us to death. We should be dancing." "But it didn't kill us," Annalisa said quietly. "Because of them. Because of Thomas. Because of the wool socks he'd given from his own kit. Because of the blankets Sergeant Hayes had misplaced. Because of the chocolate bars Kowalski and his buddies had contributed from their rations. Because 42 enemy prisoners had been treated like human beings instead of numbers on a transport manifest." The women spent that evening in subdued preparation, folding their few possessions, helping each other mend clothes for travel, trying to ignore the weight of impending goodbye. Most still wore the American boots they'd been given. Most still carried the wool socks carefully washed and dried, too precious to discard. These were more than clothing now. They were proof that the world contained kindness, even in its darkest corners. That night, Annalisa sat at the rough wooden table near the barracks' single window composing a letter by candlelight. She'd been practicing her English for weeks, hoarding vocabulary, perfecting grammar. This letter had to be perfect. This might be her only chance to say what needed saying. "Dear Corporal Brennan," I do not know if you will receive this. I do not even know if you are still alive when you read this. The war is not over. Anything can happen. But I must write. You saved my life. Not just my feet, my life. My hope. My faith that humans can be good, even in terrible times. She paused, searching for words adequate to express what she felt. English was still foreign on her tongue, the grammar not quite natural. But she persevered. You showed me that enemies can be wrong about each other, that propaganda is lies, that kindness is stronger than hate. I believed the teachers who said Americans were cruel. I believed them because I had no reason not to. But you proved them wrong. I go home to my mother and sister now. Our town is destroyed, but we will rebuild. When I rebuild, I will remember you. I will remember your friend Michael. I will remember that 42 women lived because one man chose to care when he didn't have to. You told me you were a coward. You said you saved us because you failed Michael. But Corporal Brennan Thomas, you are not a coward. Cowards run from pain. You ran toward it, toward our pain, toward our need. That is not cowardice. That is the truest courage I have ever seen. Michael would be proud of you. I know this even though I never met him. He would be proud that his friend became the kind of man who saves enemies, that his death somehow led to 42 lives saved, that his memory lives on in your hands and heart. I am proud of you too. Even though we are enemies, even though this war tells us to hate each other, I am proud to have met you. I am grateful beyond words that you were the medic who walked through that door on December 21st. Another man might have done the minimum. You did everything. I pray you survive this war. You deserve peace. You deserve happiness. You deserve to know that what you did mattered more than you can imagine. If we meet again after in a world without war, without camps, without frozen barracks and purple toes, I hope we can be friends. Real friends, not prisoner and guard. Just two people who survived something terrible together. With gratitude I cannot fully express in English or German. Annalisa Kohler Barracks, 7, December 18th, 1944, February 12th, 1945. She folded the letter carefully, creased it precisely, and tucked it inside her coat pocket. Tomorrow she would give it to him. Tomorrow she would say goodbye to the man who'd saved her life and ask nothing in return except that she survive. Tomorrow. The morning of February the 12th, 1945 arrived clear and cold, the sky a brilliant blue that seemed to mock the sombre mood. 3 2-ton trucks idled near Barracks 7 engines, rumbling exhaust forming white clouds in the frigid air. Women lined up with their meagre possessions, most wearing the American boots they'd been given, carrying the wool socks in careful bundles, clutching Hershey's bar wrappers they'd saved as impossible souvenirs of kindness. Brennan conducted final medical checks, examining 42 pairs of feet one last time. Most had healed completely, just faint scarring remaining as testimony to how close they'd come to losing Toe's feet lives. When he reached Annalisa, she was already unlacing her boots. "Not necessary," he said with a small tired smile. "I know your feet are fine. I've been checking them every day for 7 weeks." 7 weeks and 2 days, Annalisa corrected. "I count every one." "So do I." His voice was soft. "So do I." She pulled the carefully folded letter from inside her coat. "This is for you. Please, read it later. Not now. When we are gone. Will you do this?" Brennan took the letter, his scarred fingers gentle. He could feel the weight of words not yet read, emotions not yet expressed. "Thank you. I'll treasure it. I promise. And I treasure these forever." She held up the wool socks, washed carefully dried by the barracks' single heater, folded with reverence. "These will remind me always that an American soldier gave me his own socks, that enemies can be kind, that humans can be good even when everything says they should be cruel. We were never really enemies, Annalisa, not where it counts. We were just people caught in something bigger than both of us. Then I am glad we are on the same side now, the side of living, the side of remembering, the side of being human when the world tries to make us monsters." The convoy began loading. Women climbed into truck beds, helping each other up, casting long looks back at the barracks that had held such horror and unexpected grace. Greta paused to shake Sergeant Hayes's hand, a gesture that made the gruff officer blink rapidly and turn away. Young Helga hugged Private Kowalski, who blushed bright red and stammered something about maybe visiting Germany after the war if she didn't mind, if that would be okay. Annalisa was the last to board. She turned at the truck's tailgate, one foot on the step, and looked back at Brennan standing in the snow. "Corporal Brennan Thomas?" "Yes." If we meet again after the war, after everything is over, I would like to say thank you properly, not as prisoner to guard, just as one person to another, as friends." Brennan's throat was tight. "I'd like that too, very much. Then I pray we both survive. The war can't last much longer. Germany is losing, everyone knows. Soon there will be peace, and then maybe friends can just be friends."
"We will survive," Brennan said, and he tried to make himself believe it. "We have to. Otherwise all of this Michael, you, everything, it's all meaningless, and I can't accept that it's meaningless. It is not meaningless. This I promise you. What you did here will matter forever. To us. To me." She climbed into the truck, then looked back one final time. "Auf Wiedersehen, Thomas Brennan. Until we see each other again. Auf Wiedersehen, Annalisa Kohler. Stay safe." The truck's engines roared. Gears engaged with grinding protests. The convoy lurched forward, carrying 42 women toward an uncertain future, leaving behind a man who'd saved them, and in doing so, saved some essential part of himself. Brennan stood in the snow, hand raised in farewell, watching until the trucks disappeared beyond the frozen horizon.
Around him, other soldiers drifted away, back to their duties, their guard posts, their own private wars. But Brennan remained alone with the wind, and the memory of blue eyes filled with gratitude. Only when the trucks were completely out of sight did he lower his hand. Only then did he open the letter with trembling fingers. Only then did he read her words. "You are not a coward. Michael would be proud. What you did mattered more than you can imagine," and let himself cry. Private Kowalski found him 20 minutes later, sitting on a supply crate letter, clutched in his scarred hands, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. "You okay, Corporal?" Brennan looked up. His face was wet with tears, but he was smiling. Actually smiling, the first genuine smile Kowalski had seen on him since they'd met. "Yeah, Eddie. Yeah, I think I am. For the first time since Michael died, I think I might actually be okay. They were good people. The women, I mean. Not what we expected. No, not what anyone expected. That's the thing about war, it teaches you to hate people you've never met. But when you actually meet them," Brennan gestured helplessly, "they're just people, cold scared, wanting to go home. Just like us. Think we'll win the war. Yeah, we'll win. Germany's finished, everyone knows it. Few more months, maybe. Then it's over." Brennan stood, tucking Annalise's letter carefully into his jacket pocket close to his heart, next to Michael's photograph. "And then we all get to figure out how to live in a world where we're not trying to kill each other anymore. Think that'll be harder. Peace. I don't know. Maybe. War's simple enemy here, friend there, orders to follow. Peace is complicated. Peace requires us to remember we're all human. That's harder than pulling a trigger." Kowalski nodded slowly. "Those women, they'll remember us, you think. Remember that not all Americans were bad. I think so. I hope so." Brennan smiled again, sad but real.
"And I'll remember them. Remember that not all Germans were monsters. That propaganda lies. That the enemy is never the people, it's the hate. And hate can be defeated. We just proved it." Somewhere on a truck heading south through France, Annalisa Kohler held tight to her American wool socks and allowed herself to believe in something she'd stopped believing months ago. Tomorrow. After. Hope. And if enemies could become saviors, if hate could be defeated by simple kindness, if one man's grief could transform into 42 lives saved, then anything was possible. Even peace. Even forgiveness. Even a world where young women from Bavaria could be friends with young men from Boston, where the only war was against cold and suffering and despair, where humans chose to be human instead of monsters. Even that. Especially that. Spring 1945 brought victory and devastation in equal measure. Germany surrendered on May the 8th, VW Day, and the prisoner of war camps began processing releases.
Annalisa Kohler, along with the surviving women of Barrack 7, was transferred through a series of facilities until finally in mid-June she received repatriation papers and a single train ticket home. The journey to Garmisch-Partenkirchen took 3 days through a landscape of rubble. Every city she passed through looked the same: skeletal buildings, cratered streets, people moving like ghosts through the ruins. When the train finally pulled into her hometown station, Annalisa almost didn't recognize it. The mountains were still there, eternal and unchanged, but the town itself was a ruin. She walked through streets she'd known her entire life, now unrecognizable. Buildings she'd passed every day were gone. The school where she'd learned English was a pile of bricks. The church where her father's funeral had been held was missing its entire western wall. But when she turned onto her street, she saw it the bakery, or what was left of it. The front wall had collapsed, the oven inside exposed to the elements like a gutted thing. and standing in front of the rubble staring at what remained was her mother. "Mutter!" Margaret Kohler turned and her face transformed. She wasn't yet 50, but looked 70, thin, grey, bent by loss and hunger and years of fear. She ran toward her daughter with surprising strength, and they collided in an embrace that felt like drowning and breathing at the same time. "Anneliese, Anneliese, oh God, I thought you were dead. They said you were missing. They said, I'm here, I'm alive, I'm home." Behind her, mother, 12-year-old Liesel, appeared now 14, and almost as tall as Anneliese remembered herself being. The girl she'd left behind had grown into a young woman during her absence. Liesel joined the embrace, and the three of them stood there in the ruins of their family business, crying and laughing and holding each other so tight it hurt. That night in the half-collapsed house they'd managed to make barely habitable, Anneliese told them everything. About the freezing barracks, about the frostbite, about Corporal Thomas Brennan, who'd saved 42 lives with wool socks and warm water, and a grief so deep it compelled him toward compassion instead of cruelty. She showed them the socks still carefully preserved, never worn, and her mother wept. "You keep them," Margaret said. "You keep them forever. That man gave you back to us. Those socks are sacred." Anneliese placed them in a wooden chest her father had made wrapped in the letter she'd written to Brennan. She didn't know if he'd received it, didn't know if he'd even survived the rest of the war. But she kept them anyway, a tangible piece of proof that mercy was real, that enemies could choose kindness, that humanity survived even in humanity's darkest hours. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, Thomas Brennan was trying to remember how to be human. He'd survived the war, returned to Boston in July 1945 to a hero's welcome he didn't feel he deserved. The neighborhood threw a party. People clapped him on the back. Girls smiled at him. Everyone wanted to hear stories about the war, about the Germans, about what it was like to be a hero. He couldn't tell them, couldn't explain that he wasn't a hero, that Michael had died in his arms, that he'd saved 42 German women, not out of nobility, but out of guilt so crushing he couldn't breathe under its weight. Couldn't explain that every night he closed his eyes, he saw purple toes and heard whispered prayers in German and felt Michael's body growing cold. So he didn't explain. He smiled. He drank. He pretended. In September 1945, he visited Michael's mother, the hardest thing he'd ever done. She lived in the same cramped apartment in Southie. Michael's photographs still on every surface, his room unchanged, as if he might walk through the door at any moment.
"You brought my boy home,"
Mrs. O'Brien said, tears streaming down her weathered face. She pressed Michael's dog tags into Brennan's hands. "You kept him safe as long as you could. That's all a mother can ask." Brennan didn't correct her, didn't tell her that Michael's body was in a military cemetery in Belgium, that he hadn't brought anything home except guilt and nightmares and a photograph that was disintegrating from being touched too often. He just nodded and let her believe the lie that gave her comfort. The years that followed were hard ones. Brennan tried civilian jobs, factory work, construction, even a brief stint as a bartender in his father's old pub. Nothing stuck. The world of peacetime felt alien, incomprehensible. How were people supposed to care about baseball scores and weather reports when Brennan had watched a 22-year-old die from frozen feet? 1947 brought a turning point. The Boston Fire Department was hiring veterans. Brennan applied on a whim and discovered something: he could still save people, could still run toward danger when everyone else ran away, could still use his medic training to pull people from burning buildings, treat them for smoke inhalation, keep them alive until ambulances arrived. It wasn't redemption, but it was purpose. He became obsessed with cold weather rescue training, volunteered for every winter emergency call, taught classes on hypothermia and frostbite treatment. His fellow firefighters thought it was dedication. It was penance. He never married, not really. Brief relationships that fizzled when women realized they were competing with ghosts. In 1963, a relationship with a nurse named Catherine produced a daughter, Angela, born in 1964. Catherine left when Angela was 6 months old, unable to handle Brennan's nightmares, his silences, his tendency to disappear into memories of war. He raised Angela alone, a quiet child who learned early not to ask too many questions about the box marked "War Do Not Open" that her father kept in his closet. Every year, on December 21st, Brennan read Anneliese's letter. He'd never received the original. It had been lost somewhere in the chaos of Red Cross mail forwarding. But he'd memorized her words from that single reading before the convoy left. "You are not a coward. Michael would be proud. What you did mattered." He'd wanted to write back, had composed dozens of letters in his head, But how could he find one 16-year-old girl in the ruins of post-war Germany? He didn't even know if she'd survived, didn't know if she'd made it home to her mother and sister, didn't know if the frostbite had healed completely or if complications had killed her months later. So he lived with uncertainty. And every December 21st, he took out Michael's photograph, placed it beside the memory of Annaliese's face, and allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, he'd done something right. May 1952 brought an unexpected invitation, a veterans' reunion in New York City. Brennan, 36 years old, and already feeling 50, initially declined. But Angela's first-grade teacher suggested it might be good for him to reconnect with other veterans, to remember he wasn't alone in his struggles. So he went reluctantly with a duffel bag and low expectations. That same week, Annalisa Kohler, now 24, married to Franz Weber, a carpenter, and Wehrmacht veteran who'd survived the Eastern Front, was also in New York City. She was visiting her cousin Helga, the same 14-year-old from Barracks 7 who'd emigrated to America in 1949, married a GI named Bobby Patterson, and now lived in Queens with 2 small children.
On May the 15th, 1952, at approximately 2:00 p.m., Thomas Brennan walked south on Fifth Avenue, hands in his pockets, thinking about whether to attend the evening's reunion dinner or just go back to Boston early. At approximately 2:05 p.m., Annalisa Kohler walked north on Fifth Avenue 1 block west, carrying shopping bags filled with gifts for Helga's children, thinking about how different New York was from Bavaria, how overwhelming and wonderful and strange. If Brennan had walked 1 block west instead of continuing south, if Annalisa had turned east at the next corner instead of continuing north, if he'd stopped to look in that bookstore window for 5 more minutes instead of 3, if she'd paused at that street cart selling hot dogs instead of walking past. But they didn't. And life continued on its separate tracks, 2 parallel lines destined never to intersect, 2 people who'd meant everything to each other for 7 weeks and nothing for 40 years, passing within 300 yards without ever knowing. Annalisa returned to Bavaria the following week. She never knew how close she'd come. Brennan returned to Boston the same day. He never knew what he'd missed. And time, indifferent to near misses and almost meetings, continued its steady march forward. November 1984. Greta Lindemann, now 64 years old and a respected journalist in Munich, published a memoir titled Barracks 7: A Winter of Mercy. She'd spent 3 years writing it, interviewing the 8 surviving women from that frozen winter, compiling photographs and documents, verifying every detail. The book was a modest success in Germany, not a bestseller, but respected, reviewed, favorably, taught in some schools as a primary source about POW experiences. In 1985, an English translation was published. Small American press, limited distribution, mostly sold to libraries and academics. But it existed. It was out there. And somehow, inevitably, it found its way to Boston. Angela Brennan, 21 years old and studying history at Boston University, discovered it in the university library while researching a paper on POW treatment during WWII. She almost set it aside, another worthy but dry academic text. But something about the title caught her attention. A Winter of Mercy. Her father had mentioned winter, had mentioned mercy, had mentioned saving people during the war, though he'd never given details. She checked it out, read it in 2 days. And in Chapter 7, the corporal, she found him. The medic who saved us was Corporal Thomas Brennan, aged 28, from South Boston. He had dark hair and sad eyes, and hands that were missing 2 fingers from previous frostbite.
He treated our frozen feet with a gentleness that contradicted every propaganda lesson we'd been taught. He gave us his own socks taken from his personal kit because we had nothing. He saved 42 lives that winter, not because regulations required it, but because his friend Michael O'Brien had died from frostbite 2 weeks earlier, and he couldn't bear to watch anyone else die the same way. Angela read the passage 3 times. Then she read the entire chapter. Then she read Annalisa Kohler's extended interview in the appendix. Corporal Brennan showed me that propaganda lies, that enemies can be wrong about each other, that one person choosing compassion can change everything. I think of him, often wonder if he survived the war, if he found peace, if he knows that what he did mattered. I hope he knows. I pray he knows. Angela brought the book home on March the 12th, 1985, her father's 69th birthday. He was retired now, living alone in the same small house he'd bought in 1965, spending his days reading, walking, attending Mass more out of habit than faith. He opened the door wearing his old firefighter department sweatshirt and reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. "Happy birthday, Dad. I got you something." She handed him the book. Brennan looked at the cover, read the title,
frowned slightly. "What's this?" "Chapter 7, Angela said quietly. "Read Chapter 7. He did, standing right there in the doorway, coat still on, door still open, letting in March cold. He read Chapter 7, then Chapter 8, then Annalisa's interview. His hands started trembling. The book almost fell. Angela caught it. "Dad?" "They remembered," he whispered. "Oh, God." They remembered. He walked to his couch and sat down heavily, book clutched against his chest.
Angela sat beside him and watched her father cry, really cry, not the silent tears she'd seen occasionally, but deep, wrenching sobs that shook his entire body. I thought it didn't matter. I thought I was just... Michael died. And I thought saving them was just... I didn't know they remembered. I didn't know it mattered. It mattered, Dad. Of course it mattered. You saved 42 people. I saved them because I couldn't save him. And that makes it less... Angela put her hand on his shoulder. Dad, you read what they wrote. You changed their lives. You changed how they saw the world. That girl, Annalisa, she wrote that you showed her enemies could be kind. Do you know how important that is? Do you know how many people never learn that? Brennan opened the book again, reading and rereading Annalisa's words. I think of him often. I hope he knows what he did mattered. Can I... His voice cracked. Can I find her? Is there a way to find her? Angela was already reaching for the phone. I'll call the publisher. They might forward a letter. 3 weeks later, a letter arrived at the home of Franz and Annalisa Weber in Garmisch-Partenkirchen. It came in a publisher's envelope with American postage and careful handwriting. Annalisa, 57 years old, now widowed since Franz had died of a heart attack in 1982, was in her garden when her daughter Margaret brought it out. She was retired from teaching English at the local gymnasium, spent her days tending flowers and visiting with her 4 grandchildren, and trying not to think too much about the past. Mutter, this came for you, from America. Annalisa wiped her hands on her apron and took the envelope, opened it carefully, unfolded the letter inside. Dear Frau Weber, you knew me as Corporal Thomas Brennan, Medic, Forward Camp 7B, Winter, 1944-45. My daughter found Greta Lindemann's book. I read Chapter 7. I read your interview. I never knew. All these years I never knew if you survived, if you made it home, if the treatment worked, if you remembered. I thought maybe I'd failed you too. Failed all of you. Like I failed Michael. But you remembered. You wrote that it mattered. You wrote that I wasn't a coward. I need you to know you saved my life too. After Michael died, I wanted to die. Thought I should have died. But seeing you survive, seeing all of you survive, gave me a reason to keep going. You saved my life by letting me save yours. I never received your letter from 1945. I wish I had. I would have written back immediately. Would have told you that you were right. Michael would have been proud. I understand that now. Finally. After 40 years. I understand. If you're willing, I would very much like to hear from you. To know that you're well. To tell you in person, if possible, what your words meant. With gratitude and respect. Thomas Brennan, Boston, Massachusetts. Annalisa sat down on her garden bench and read the letter 3 times. Her hands were shaking. Tears blurred the words. Margaret sat beside her, concerned. Mutter, what is it? He's alive, Annalisa whispered. Thomas Brennan, the American medic who saved us. He's alive. He's alive. And he remembered us. She wrote back that evening. Included her phone number. 3 days later, the phone rang. International calls in 1985 required patience and expense and good timing with time zones. The connection crackled with static. But when Brennan's voice came through, older, rougher, but unmistakably him, Annalisa felt 40 years collapse into nothing. Annalisa, Thomas, it's really you. It's really me. They both laughed. Then they both cried. Then they talked for 2 hours, filling in 40 years of gaps. He told her about firefighting, about Angela, about the decades of guilt that had only recently begun to ease. She told him about Franz, about teaching English, about her grandchildren, about the wool socks she'd kept for 4 decades in a wooden chest. You kept them. His voice broke. All this time, every day I look at them, every day I remember that American soldier who gave me his socks, who saved my life, who proved propaganda lies. I'm so sorry I didn't find you sooner. You found me now. That is what matters. Thomas, can I ask you something? Anything. Can I see you in person before we are too old or too dead? Can we meet one more time? Yes, Brennan said without hesitation. Yes. God, yes, please. October 23rd, 1985. Boston Logan Airport. Terminal C, international arrivals. Thomas Brennan stood holding a handwritten sign, Annalisa Kohler. His daughter Angela stood beside him, steadying him because at 69 his hands shook and his heart was racing and he was terrified and hopeful in equal measure. She probably looks different, Dad. 40 years is a long time. I know, What if she's disappointed? What if I'm not what she remembers? Dad, she flew across an ocean to see you. She's not disappointed. The flight from Frankfurt via London landed 15 minutes early. Passengers began streaming through the arrival gate, businessmen, families, students. Brennan watched each face trying to recognize 16-year-old Annalisa in 57-year-old strangers. Then he saw her. Older, yes. Grey hair where there'd been blonde glasses she hadn't worn before, lines around her eyes and mouth that spoke of 40 years of smiles and tears and living. But those eyes, still that same startling blue, still that same directness, still unmistakably her. She saw him at the same moment. Stopped walking, stared. They stood frozen for 10 seconds that felt like 10 hours, just looking at each other across 30 feet of airport terminal. Then, simultaneously, as if choreographed, they both spoke, Corporal Brennan. Annalisa. And then they were moving toward each other. Not running. They were too old for running, but walking faster, until they met in the middle and embraced with the fierce desperation of two people who'd thought they'd never see each other again. You're alive, Annalisa whispered into his shoulder. You're really alive. I prayed so hard, every day, every single day. So am I. God, so am I. I thought... Brennan pulled back to look at her face. I thought I'd failed you. Thought the frostbite might have come back, might have killed you. I didn't know. For 40 years I didn't know. You didn't fail me. You saved me. Saved all of us. They held each other and cried in the middle of Boston Logan Airport, while travelers flowed around them like water around stones. Angela stood back with Annalisa's daughter Margaret, who'd accompanied her mother on the journey, and both younger women found themselves crying too, witnessing this reunion of two people who'd saved each other in different ways across 40 years and an ocean. That evening, in Brennan's modest home in Dorchester, they sat at his kitchen table with coffee and the box marked, War Do Not Open. I haven't opened this since Angela was born, Brennan said. 21 years. Couldn't face it. Do you want to face it now? With you here? Yes, I think I can with you here. He opened the box slowly. Inside, Michael's photograph, worn thin from being touched too often. His dog tags. A Purple Heart Brennan had never displayed. Letters from soldiers he'd served with. Field notes from medical treatments. And tucked in the bottom, wrapped in protective plastic, a photocopy of a letter in careful English handwriting. Annalisa gasped. That's my letter. From 1945. But how I thought you never received it. I didn't. Not then. Brennan pulled out the photocopy carefully. The Red Cross found it in their archives in 1999, 54 years late. They forwarded it to me with an apology. I read it standing at my mailbox, cried for an hour, called in sick to work the next day because I couldn't stop crying. You received it, after all that time. In 2000, 55 years after you wrote it, and I thought you must have forgotten about me by then. Thought maybe you didn't even want to be reminded. So I didn't reach out, just kept the letter. Read it every December 21st along with Michael's photograph. Annalisa reached across the table and took his scarred hand. Thomas, I never forgot. Not one single day in 40 years. Never. Neither did I. She reached into her bag and pulled out a carefully wrapped bundle, unfolded the layers of tissue paper to reveal the wool socks 40 years old, impossibly fragile but still intact. American military issue, olive drab, the toes slightly stretched from where her swollen feet had filled them. You kept them, Brennan whispered. You really kept them. These socks saved my life. They are sacred. They are proof that humans can be good. I keep them, so I never forget. She placed them on the table beside Michael's photograph. Your friend. He would be proud of you. I think maybe he would. Finally, after all this time, I think maybe he would. They sat in Brennan's kitchen until almost midnight, talking, remembering, filling in all the gaps that letters and phone calls couldn't bridge. He showed her photos of Angela as a baby, as a teenager, as a college student. She showed him photos of her daughter Margaret, her 4 grandchildren, her classroom at the gymnasium where she'd taught English for 30 years. You became a teacher, Brennan said, smiling. You told me you wanted to be an English teacher. You did it. And you became firefighter. You saved more people. You kept saving people. Had to. After Michael. After you. I had to keep trying. Had to make it mean something. It meant everything, Thomas. To me, to all of us, to Michael, wherever he is, it meant everything. Near midnight, as Margaret and Angela were preparing to leave for their hotel, Brennan pulled out one more item from the box. A small notebook, the same one he'd carried in Barrack 7 with phonetic German phrases written in his careful handwriting. Können Sie Ihre Zehen fühlen? I kept this too, couldn't throw it away. Every phrase in here is connected to that week. Annalisa opened it carefully, running her fingers over the words. You tried so hard.
Your German was terrible, she laughed. But you tried. That is what mattered. Not perfect German. Just trying. I try to remember that now. That trying is enough. That doing everything you can is enough even when you fail. Michael, I did everything I could for Michael. It wasn't enough to save him, but it was enough to honor him. And by saving us, you gave his death meaning. You made sure he didn't die for nothing. Brennan looked at this woman, this girl he'd saved, and who'd saved him, and felt something he hadn't felt in 40 years. Not peace exactly, but something close. Acceptance, understanding, permission to live with the grief instead of being crushed by it. Thank you, he said, for writing that letter, for keeping those socks, for flying across an ocean to see an old man who couldn't save his best friend but tried anyway. Thank you for being the man who proved my teachers wrong, for showing me that enemies can be kind.
For giving me 40 years of knowing that humans can be good even in hell. They embraced one final time before Annalise left for her hotel. It was easier this time, not goodbye forever, just goodbye for tonight. They'd see each other tomorrow, the day after. She was staying in Boston for a week. There was time now. Finally, after 40 years, there was time. 1985 to 2003. 18 years of friendship, deeper than romance, stronger than family ties, built on shared trauma and mutual salvation. Annalisa visited Boston 4 more times. Brennan visited Bavaria twice, marveling at the rebuilt bakery Margaret had reopened it in 1995, meeting Annalisa's grandchildren, standing on the frozen plateau that had almost killed 42 women 50 years earlier. They corresponded regularly, letters at first, then email when both learned to use computers in their 70s. They spoke on the phone every December 21st, marking the anniversary of the day he'd walked through that barracks door. They attended historical conferences together, testified to oral history projects, visited schools to talk about reconciliation and forgiveness and the power of choosing humanity over hatred. In 1995, they travelled to Belgium together to find the site of Forward Camp 7B. It was farmland, now all traces of barracks and guard towers long since ploughed under. They stood in a wheat field under summer sun and remembered winter cold. Planted a tree, an American oak, to mark the spot where enemies became friends. By 2003, both were slowing down. Brennan was 87, his firefighter's body finally giving out heart-weakening memories starting to slip. Annalisa was 75, sharp as ever, but moving carefully, bones, brittle arthritis making every step painful. In May 2003, Brennan suffered a massive heart attack. Angela called Annalisa immediately.
She flew to Boston within 24 hours. Thomas Brennan died on May 17, 2003, at Massachusetts General Hospital with his daughter Angela on one side of the bed and Annalisa Kohler-Weber on the other. He was conscious until the last hour, lucid and calm, and for once in his long life at peace. "Tell Michael," he whispered to Annalisa in those final minutes. "Tell him I kept the promise, told him I'd come home, took longer than expected, but I'm coming home." "He knows," Annalisa said, holding his scarred hand. "He's been waiting, and he's proud, so proud of you. Thank you for everything, for writing that letter, for remembering, for flying across an ocean, for showing me that what I did mattered. It mattered more than you can ever know. Take care of the socks, the wool socks. Make sure people remember. Make sure they know that enemies can be kind, that humans can choose to be human. I promise, Thomas." He smiled, closed his eyes, and between one breath and the next, he was gone. The funeral was small firefighter honor guard, full Catholic mass burial beside his parents in the Irish section of Mount Calvary Cemetery. Angela gave a eulogy. Several retired firefighters spoke.
And Annalisa, white-haired and bent but determined, stood at the podium and spoke words she'd been carrying for 58 years. "Thomas Brennan saved my life twice," she said, voice clear despite her age. "Once in 1944 with warm water and wool socks. Once in 1985 when he let me thank him, when he showed me that memory and gratitude can heal wounds we think are permanent. He carried guilt for 41 years about a death that wasn't his fault. He thought he was a coward for not saving his friend Michael O'Brien. But cowards don't run toward pain. Cowards don't risk court-martial to save enemy prisoners. Cowards don't spend 18 years speaking at schools about reconciliation and forgiveness."
Thomas Brennan was many things: medic, firefighter, father, friend. But he was never a coward. He was the bravest man I ever knew. And Michael O'Brien, wherever he is, I know he's saying the same thing. Well done, Tommy. Well done. Rest in peace, Thomas. Your mercy never froze, and it never will. After the service, Angela gave Annalisa a box. "Dad wanted you to have this. His instructions were very specific." Inside Michael O'Brien's photograph, Thomas Brennan's medals, his firefighter badge, and a note in his shaky handwriting dated 1 week before his death. "Annalisa, these belong with you now. You're the keeper of the story. Make sure people remember that we chose humanity when we could have chosen hate. Make sure they know Michael's death led to 42 lives saved. Make sure they understand that mercy matters. Thank you for 40 years of friendship. See you on the other side."
Tom Angela also showed Annalisa something she'd found while sorting her father's belongings. The box marked "War Do Not Open" contained a second item Brennan had never shown anyone. A photocopy of Annalisa's 1945 letter, but this one had notes scribbled in the margins in Brennan's handwriting dated 2000. Next to "You are not a coward." "I cried for an hour when I read this. 55 years late, but maybe exactly on time." Next to "Michael would be proud." Maybe he would. God, I hope he would. Next to "What you did mattered. It mattered because you told me it did. Thank you." At the bottom, "Found this in Red Cross Archives 2000. Should have looked for her sooner. But maybe fate was saving us both until we could really hear each other." Annalisa held the paper and sobbed. "He knew. After 2000 he knew I'd written to him. And he thought I'd forgotten him. But you hadn't. Never. Not for one single day." 2010. Annalisa's granddaughter Sophia, 28 years old and studying international relations at University of Munich, contacted Angela Brennan with a proposal: create a documentary about Thomas and Annalisa, about Barracks 7, about how enemies became friends and friendship became legacy. 2011 to 2013. They compiled everything: letters, photographs, interviews with the 5 surviving women from Barracks 7, testimonies from retired firefighters who'd worked with Brennan, oral histories from Annalisa's students. The documentary premiered at the Berlin Film Festival in 2014, won a Human Rights Award, was shown in schools across Germany and America. 2015, a memorial ceremony at the site of Forward Camp 7B. Historical marker placed reading Barracks 7 Winter 1944-45, where enemies became humans and humans became hope. Attendees included Greta Lindemann, 95, still sharp journalist to the end. Helga Patterson, 85, now widowed, living in California. One other survivor, Angela Brennan, and her children, Annalisa Weber, and her daughter and grandchildren. Greta spoke, voice still strong. "We lived because one man chose compassion over convenience. We remembered because he showed us that propaganda lies. We're here today because Thomas Brennan proved that mercy is stronger than hate." Annalisa, 87 years old and using a walker, but determined, planted a second oak tree beside the first, this one from an acorn taken from the tree they'd planted in 1995. 2 trees for 2 people who saved each other. May their roots grow deep, may their branches spread wide, may they remind everyone who sees them that choosing humanity is always worth it. Annalisa Kohler Weber died peacefully on November 3rd, 2016, age 88, in her home in Garmisch-Partenkirchen, surrounded by family. She'd requested to be buried wearing the wool socks, American military issue, olive drab, fragile but intact after 72 years. Her daughter Margaret honored the request. The funeral was attended by 200 people, family, students, friends, and 3 old women who'd survived Barracks 7 together 72 years earlier. Angela Brennan flew from Boston to give a eulogy. "Annalisa saved my father's life by letting him save hers. She showed him that guilt doesn't have to be prison, that memory can be blessing instead of curse, that enemies are only enemies until they're not. She kept wool socks for 72 years because they reminded her that humans can be good.
That's what I'll remember about her, not the teacher, not the survivor, but the keeper of mercy.
The woman who never forgot that one person choosing kindness can change everything. Sophia Weber, now 34, and a professor herself, added, "My grandmother told me once, the war taught me to hate. Thomas Brennan taught me to hope. I chose hope. Every day for 70 years, I chose hope." That's her legacy. That's what we carry forward. Washington, D.C., United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, Special Exhibition, The Frozen Mercy, A Story of Survival and Humanity. Display case, a pair of wool socks, olive drab and impossibly fragile. Beside them, Thomas Brennan's medic bag, scarred and worn. Letters in English and German. Photographs of 42 women and 1 corporal. Michael O'Brien's dog tags. A notebook with phonetic German phrases. Placard. In December 1944, Corporal Thomas Brennan saved 42 German women from frostbite by giving them his own wool socks and treating them with compassion instead of cruelty. His act of mercy transformed enemies into friends and proved that humanity survives even in humanity's darkest hours. This exhibition honors both Thomas Brennan and Annalisa Kohler-Weber, who spent the rest of their lives teaching that choosing kindness matters more than following hate. School groups visit. Students read the letters, look at the photographs, see the wool socks preserved behind glass. Teachers ask questions. Discussion begins. One afternoon in March 2024, a 12-year-old girl raises her hand. Ms. Weber. She's addressing Sophia, who's giving a tour. "Do you think people today would do what your grandfather and Corporal Brennan did? Choose kindness instead of following propaganda?" Sophia pauses. It's the question she gets asked most often, the question that matters most. I have to believe they would. Because if we stop believing humans can choose compassion, if we accept that propaganda and hatred always win, then we lose what makes us human. My grandmother kept those socks for 72 years to remind herself that mercy is real. I keep telling this story for the same reason. The girl nods slowly. I hope people today would be like them. Me too. And you know what? The best way to make sure people today are like them is to be like them ourselves. To choose kindness when hatred is easier. To see humans instead of enemies. To remember that what we do today becomes someone's memory tomorrow. The tour continues. The students move on to the next exhibit. But that girl lingers at the wool socks display, staring at the fragile olive drab fabric, reading Annalisa's words inscribed on the placard. These socks saved my life. They are sacred. They remind me that humans can be good even in hell. Somewhere in Belgium, 2 oak trees grow side by side in what was once a POW camp and is now peaceful farmland. Their roots intertwine beneath the soil, their branches spread wide above. Local farmers tell stories about them, about the American soldier and the German girl, about winter mercy and summer hope, about how enemies became saviors and saviors became legends. In Boston, Thomas Brennan's name is engraved on the firefighter memorial, with a small addition requested by Angela, saved 42 lives in war, thousands in peace. In Garmisch-Partenkirchen, a plaque outside the rebuilt bakery reads, "In memory of Hermann Kohler and his daughter Annalisa, who taught us that bread nourishes the body and kindness nourishes the soul." In museums across 2 continents, wool socks and letters and photographs tell a story that refuses to fade. 72 years after the fact, 80 years after the fact, 100 years from now, the story persists. In the frozen winter of 1944, 42 women nearly died. 1 man saved them. And both sides spent the rest of their lives proving that mercy matters more than hate. Michael O'Brien died in 1944. But through Thomas Brennan's hands and Annalisa Kohler's memory and 42 women's survival, his death meant something, meant everything, became the seed from which mercy grew. And in Belgium, 2 oak trees stand as testament mercy never freezes. Hope never dies. And sometimes, just sometimes, the enemy is just a friend we haven't met yet.